So, guys, thank you so much for staying here for the second half. And after the pizza, it's kind of tempting to just run off. But thank you for staying. Now we're going to talk about compassionate cities in practice. And just to tell you a little bit about myself, I was born and raised in Colombia. I studied in the United States, international relations and economics. And now I'm doing my master. It's called the Four Cities Euro Master in Urban Studies. And right now I'm based at the University of Copenhagen. But parallel to that, I'm also working on my master thesis in social innovation, specifically looking at socially inclusive initiatives in two case studies in Medellin, Colombia, and Malmö, right here. So I'm gonna use or show you some of the insights of my thesis work to try to bring this urbanistic, practical, and maybe critical perspective to the topic of compassionate cities. This is the outline for today. Let's start with some brief introduction talking about contemporary behavior of cities. But most of the time that I want to spend on is trying to figure out what compassion really means for cities in practice. And I pose some questions on four perspectives that I think are relevant. Some of the, like, does it have to do with promoting social inclusion in the city? Some aspects that Derek already talked about. Does it have to do with who plans the city or like levels of participation in that? Does it have to do with providing an opportunity to those in need, vulnerable groups? Or what about networks of solidarity? So I'll touch a little bit on this, and I'll provide some concrete examples around the world from my research in Colombia, in Europe as well, to try to illustrate this. So we'll start with contemporary behavior of cities. Hi, Derek. See me? Okay. Yeah, perfect. Even though I think he has my presentation. All right, so we have this concept of urban entrepreneurialism, which is basically just a fancy way of saying that cities are behaving more and more as businesses. So, what does this really mean in practice? If we think about it, what do businesses do? They try to cut costs where they can, which unfortunately in cities it comes to reducing spending, where usually in social programs. So what else do business do? They try to maximize returns, make profit. How cities could do that? Well, we have the element of land acquisitions. They built a neighborhood, trying to extract rents from there and trying to make it more profitable. There's something that we're seeing all across the board in different cities. What else do business do? Something really important that Derek mentioned already is the concept of marketing, of branding. The cities need to compete. And how do they compete? They market themselves as smart cities, the creative, sustainable, livable, all these things. So I'm wondering if also the compassionate city is one of these, another label that cities could use to be like, hey, we're doing something different to all the other ones. Just to touch on some examples of what I'm talking about, this is an advertisement in Brussels newspapers in English to invest in apartments in Budapest. So, of course, this is tailored to the international expat elite in Brussels, trying to get them to invest some money out of their country. Another example could be this one. Is from a Chinese newspaper calling to invest in luxury apartments in Manchester. So we see these residential properties being treated purely as trading commodities, rather than that an actual place for people to live in, to call home, for them to inhabit. So what are the implications of this behavior in cities? So I think we can think of many, but the most important ones can be summarized in these three. Real estate speculation starts to drive more and more this urban planning and urban development, and of course the link public policies linked to it, and we have many um, social consequences that could come from it. So second, we see a multiplication of urban development projects linked to just trying to satisfy the investor needs and what the investor needs to have in a place, ideally, to to satisfy what they want rather than to meet the needs of the people that are going to inhabit these buildings. So of course, this leads to raising rents and affordable housing in many cities around the world. For example, this example is from Jakarta in Indonesia, which this urban entrepreneurialism behavior exacerbates the already existing social spatial inequalities. So now we must have in mind that what I'm describing now is mostly seen in cities in the US and global cities like London, Tokyo, New York, Singapore, cities in China. And I think it's much less, to a lesser extent, here in the welfare states or in the smaller cities in Europe, but it's just to show you guys a general trend of how cities are behaving nowadays. So with that in mind, how can we think of compassion in the city? What do you guys think of compassion could mean? Any ideas? Not a rhetorical question. I actually expect some feedback. Anybody? Ideas? Yes? Respect the needs of the citizens? Yeah? Yeah? Exactly. Very important. So, equality, citizens, everybody deserves a place in the city, not just the elite, not just um, the urban development programs. Okay, so here I pose four different perspectives, four different questions, and together we're gonna try to figure out what it really means to be compassionate for the city. And I bring again concrete examples from cities around the world that are not in this charter of compassion that Derek mentioned. So let's keep that in mind. This might be other ways that cities are compassionate. So to start, I pose a question: does compassion really, what does it mean? Is it about promoting social inclusion through strategic planning? That could be an idea. Um, is it to respond to urban problems through the lens of compassion, putting people's needs at the center of the urban projects, not this development of high sky-rise buildings that are trying to make profits for the city, but are those things really needed for the people? Do they need schools? Do they need a hospital instead of the shopping mall, for example? So also we can use urbanism and the design of urbanism for people themselves. And here I want to mention these two books from Jan Gale, Cities for People and Life Between Buildings. Here I have a copy that we actually read in class from my classes. I can pass it around. And he talks about using this design of urbanism and how you can use little details of the streets, of buildings, on the way you plan really a street to be more inclusive. Um, there's other ideas about using urban planning as a tool to remediate inequalities. How can we do that? And to give access to those in needs. If we have disconnected parts of the city, how can we connect them? How can we make them more inclusive? So to illustrate that, I want to take you guys to Medellin, Colombia. Has anybody been to Medellin? One person hidden over there. Okay. Anybody else? Just one. Okay. So this hopefully is interesting and fun for you guys. So just to start with some basics, Medellin is located in the northwest part of the country, second largest city in Colombia, about 2.5 million. And as you can see in the picture, is located in the middle of a valley. So here you have the center where most of the buildings are, and it has a serious case of urban sprawl. We have like neighborhoods going up the mountains in basically every direction that you can think of. Also, you guys have probably heard of it. Due to Netflix series of Narcos, is this bad reputation that Medellin has. We have a context of violence and narco traffic from the 1980s, but actually, to continuous political will and a very strong civil society, this city has been able to turn around and transform in an incredible manner. So it has gone from being one of the most violent cities in the 1980s to actually the most innovative city in the world by 2013. We have it was chosen by the Rockefeller Foundation as one of the 33 most resilient cities in the world. We have global events like the World Urban Forum that happened in 2014 in Medellin. We have popping out Medellin Lab, Fab Lab, all these initiatives attracting investors. We're talking about innovative cities. So the image of the city in the 2000s really turned around, really transformed. But what is most importantly is that translated really in the quality of life of the people. So, what are some examples of strategic urban planning to promote social inclusion? These concept of library parks, they have 35 all around the city and are located strategically in marginalized neighborhoods. Not only in the center when the rich kids could go and do their homework, but really in the middle of the most impoverished, marginalized neighborhoods all over. They have 35 all over the city, and they have this concept of these green open areas where kids can play, but also a space where parents can work, can do maybe their startups, they do their businesses, have some computers with high technology, also a space for the kids to do their homework. They work as cultural center, bringing information about the city, about the neighborhood, some history there. It's a library, it's a cultural center, it's a space for people to meet. Also, grassroots organizations and grassroots movements can have their space there. So we see that in the public libraries. Also, we recall the notion of how Medellin is a valley. So something like these settings, like here in the center of the city, we have the big buildings where the resources are, where all the jobs are. You have to go there to really make a living. Then in the outskirts, in the mountains, we have all the most marginalized and disadvantaged neighborhoods. So you guys, sorry, are the disadvantaged ones, and over here as well. So this is pretty much like this setting how the city really is. And if we look closely at these uphills in the mountains, this is the picture we get. Our houses literally stacked on top of each other. Um, and you can just imagine the problem of mobility, of connectivity that these people have just to get from here to the city center. I mean, what streets do you use? Do you even use a motorcycle? What about people with disabilities moving here? So it's really many social problems stacked on top of each other. So in the 13th commune is one of the most disadvantaged neighborhood in the city, also famous for the violence and the suffering that they experienced in the past decade. They did these electric escalators. Could you think of electric escalators in one of these neighborhoods? It was inspired by Barcelona. They do have something similar, and they juxtapose that project in these neighborhoods to try to promote more social inclusion, mobility, connectivity, and of course improve the quality of life of the very people surrounding here, and they can move easily through. Another example of urban planning aimed at social inclusion is the Metro Cable. And these are cable cars that are integrated into the public transport system to connect these high areas of the city to the center. So imagine if before you had a slow bus going through all the little streets, taking 2, 3 hours to get to town, you do your business, sell your things, then you have other 2, 3 hours going up the hill at the end of your day. So what this did is like cut that commute for the residents of these hills to 20, 30 minutes. So we see a really improvement in the quality of life. They have five lessons. They focus mainly on. I mean, not the city has all the hills, but mostly, like, for example, they will have here one, here other one, and on the other side a couple one. Yeah. They're cheap. They're affordable. I mean, I took this picture myself. I went there and I saw a lot of people using them. So it's not like they have any kind of subsidized, but they're like affordable. I think for the price that they could use, the 2 3 buses to go down. Is just one ticket to use this ride plus the time that it saves. So I think it's really something that people use and that impact them in a very positive way. hmm so moving on to my set of four questions. The second one would be: does compassion have anything to do with who plans the city? So we have the traditional view of urban planning, sitting in a room and doing the calculations very metric and meticulously, trying to produce things like this that looks like grids for our cities. But does that really work? Does the planner know what is best for the people? That assuming that that is the intention of the planner to begin with, and not following these entrepreneurialist tendencies that we talked in the beginning. So even when they do want to make places for people, does this approach really work? Then are some other perspectives that I have opened up the floor for organic city making, or these concepts of co-creation, co-participation in urban planning, that are argued to have a greater sense of place, sense of belonging. And I think that that has some truth in it. If you think about it, if you create something yourself, you participate in it, you feel like you own it, you appropriate it in some sense. So it's also important that this changes the power relation. It's no longer a top-down perspective of the planner um, doing and saying how it should be, but it's like asking the people, what do you need to make this city more livable? All right. And to illustrate that, we can cross the bridge to Copenhagen, which I assume more people have been in Copenhagen than in Medellin. Who's been to Copenhagen? All right, mostly all of us. All right, so I'll save some of the basics. We'll go directly to these two neighborhoods in Timbir and Kristiania. And these two have very different approaches to urban planning within the same city, leading, of course, to different communities and lifestyles. So to plan or not to plan, that's the question. In one hand, we have Timbier, planned meticulously by the famous architect Steen Eiler Rasmussen, if I can pronounce that correctly, from 1950 to 1972, and it was a top-down plan approach where the state is in control, having this paternalistic role of how the city should be. On the other hand, you guys are probably familiar with Kristiania, which is it was not created by conventional planning, but emerged naturally out of the needs of people, and it has been like that since 1971. So I'll just go now in more detail about each one. From the planning perspective, these are images of the original plans of Team Beer by Rasmussen. And you can see it was planned as an organized grid, meeting all the criteria of the urban planning. I mean, we have balance between green spaces and buildings, spaces for leisure and encounter, sports facilities, organization in geometric patterns and straight lines. We have all the check marks that we need. This is how it looks today. Pretty much the original plan of the architect. But this area is of social housing units, which has been declared a ghetto because it matches certain criteria of unemployment, level of crime, low level of education and income, and has a certain percentage of residents with non-Western background. So if we label it like that, if we treat a neighborhood in this manner, you can imagine the amount of like social conflict, of social distress that these people could feel of being labeled a ghetto directly from the state top down. When I visited the neighborhood, I was able to evidence some of these conflict. There was actually a protest going on. This is front of the library that was just opening. The mayor was there to open it, but I found this sign, which translates something as "Stop the demolition of our homes. We won't leave Team Beer." So I'm like, what is this about? So I did a bit of research and found that right now it's 100% public housing, but the city wants to bring that to 40% only and 60% private. So we can just imagine how these people can feel, are there taking us away from here, what's going to happen to our house, to the homes some residents there have been for 15, 20 years. So we can see these conflicts that could arise. But let's jump to Kristiania. Um, Here, to make a long story short, they have some military barracks over here that were abandoned at the time. Housing was very unaffordable, so when you mix these things together, you create pressure in people. And in 1971, there was a group of people that just entered and took over this area and appropriated it as housing. So this is pure reflection of what people need, what the government is not doing, and they just took it on their own hands. Today, they are a self-governed autonomous community of 900 people. where they have meetings, make decisions collectively, build their own houses. They're responsible for common areas. They also have a health center, a place, free clothes for the ones that need them. So we can see is a free society, how they like to call it. Just to quote from the website I found here, there is room for dreams and souls of fire, with social and physical free room to develop new ideas and initiatives. We, the residents, decide by ourselves why, when, and how we'll develop our town. So we have this sense of freedom. Yeah, we manage ourselves, but also with freedom comes big responsibility. Each person is responsible for their own private area, but also the common ones, and the condition of the entire town. So just to compare them a bit, in the upper left we have Team Beer, which is a space mostly deserted, dominated by cars, parking lots. Here, Kristiania, we have much more social interactions. They move either by feet or bikes because cars are prohibited. Um, Actually, the architect of Team Beer realizes this sharp contrast that was going on in the 1970s, and he quotes himself. This is the architect from Think Beer: when everything is regulated and normalized and forced into the right forms in a fully heartless way, to Christiania, where everything is free, many would think too free. So this is to raise questions about how cities come to be, how neighborhoods are formed. They be top down? Should they be bottom up? My third question about compassion is: does it have to do anything with giving an opportunity to those in need? In this world of inequalities, of scarce resources, um, is it giving access, knowledge, benefits to those people in need, trying to give them a helping hand? Should we pay more attention to the vulnerable groups of society? Question mark. Some examples could be from Vienna, the Shade Steward. Vienna, this is a social enterprise that hires homeless people, pays them a salary, and um, and they work as tour guides in the city to really take the tourists or even locals to take them around through their eyes. I took it myself when I was there, and you really experience the city in a totally different way if it's guided by the regular tourist guide or by a homeless people. You go to different places, you think about it differently, you are more conscious and more aware of issues like this one. So we have the double benefit. One, they're creating more jobs and empowerment to the homeless, and two, they're making the issue more visible to the general public. Going back to Medellin, I think this initiative was very interesting. It's called Escuela para la Inclusión, which could be translated as a school for inclusion, and is a public sector initiative created by the mayor's office at the Department of Social Inclusion, Families, and Human Rights. And is a school for adults that tries to respond to social exclusion in the labor market. And their focus are these groups right here, which are disadvantaged groups, are often victims of discriminations, and because of that, they often have a hard time entering the labor market. And usually, people are not just one of these categories, we could say, but when you have several of them, and you get like double discrimination in a sense. So these are the people that they tailor to. What they do is some sort of reverse engineer. First, trying to look at what are the demands of the market through partner companies, and then once they have identified that, they try to provide training of those demanded skills. So, how do they do the actual training? In basically two categories. The soft skills, we have to have in mind that these people are they have had a complicated life. They're under special circumstances. So we need to first empower their social and emotional development. So we have courses like emotional management, forgiveness, duties and rights of work, money management. These are things that we as middle class people, working students, we take for granted. I mean, those things are already checked. We own them. We know how to behave in society. We know how to manage money. But people that have gone into under other circumstances in life, maybe they need to start there. After that, they work on their hard skills, which are the actual trade to gain employability. So someone is trying to enter the labor market from the bottom up. Really, they could gain just any trade or skills that they could get is gonna potentialize them immensely. So they teach them some basic skills like how to be a painter, plumber, construction works, things like that, with the aim to find a job either one of these partner companies or either to use the skills and be autonomous and be able to make a living with that. So another aspect of compassion, is it about building networks of solidarity here? Question. And here I want to bring this old text from Immanuel Kant. It's called Eternal, the Essay on Eternal Peace from 1795, where he mentions compassion as hospitality to foreigners, based on the concept that the surface of the earth is is common ownership to all of humankind. And I think we had to review a lot of these ideas that could be old but can be very well applied to today's society. So is compassion really building a social fabric to support one another, to ones that are different from us, that have different backgrounds? That is what he's talking about. Can we relate it to maybe some examples of support to immigrants, or when a natural disaster happens, sending international aid? Sometimes we see the campaigns in social media, volunteers getting resources together to help the earthquake or the hurricane or the victims that are even thousands of miles away from where we are those networks of solidarity. But we don't have to go really too far to find some examples. Here in Malmo, we have organizations like Mine and Midlive that are mentorship programs to support newcomers. And in the other hand, they also create awareness of the need of greater diversity in the workplace. So they work with the candidates on one hand and with the companies and organizations in the other hand. We have also programs like Hack Your Future, which happens in this same place here in Food Cafe, where they teach programming to immigrants as tech jobs are really in high demand here in Malmo and the country. Other examples from Malmo are Yala Trapan, this labor integrated social enterprise where they strengthen the position of foreign born women in the labor market through different skills, through cooking, sewing, cleaning. There's the idea is to potentialize ideas that the skills that they have to be able to make a living in a dignified manner, not necessarily the straight way forward of learning Swedish and being integrated in the labor market that way. Other examples are the Social Platform. It's an organization of European NGOs that they have many social aims, but among the ones relevant here that I found is the assistance and empowerment of people with vulnerable communities and in vulnerable situations, and they promote equality and social inclusion, like to migrants, ethnic and religious minorities. So are these also examples of networks of solidarity and compassion? And just to wrap up, I want to leave you guys with some thoughts about this. When we go back to the first presentation, we try to relate about this charter for compassion. I think it really has exceptional values and morals when we think about the Dalai Lama, the philosophy of the religion of peace and compassion that we should have with one another. All of that is commendable. I'm like 100% for it. But to me, that's just a first step in the awareness that we need to be compassionate and that cities are seeing that. But we saw with the example of Louisville, sometimes it just gets in the surface and it's just one more technique to be able to market your city and label it like that. But the churches need to be enforced somehow, need to be attached to some guidelines of how we can be compassionate through tangible action in cities. And I think the last couple words are very important because cities are the epicenter of where the action happens with all the top-down policies from the EU, from governments, even from local governments. They really get actualized and affect the lives of people. So just my last point is to say that the behavior and the priorities that cities have and the city government and the whole city entirely, it really determines the true compassionate character. This is Thank you so much for listening.